Last time on Feast for Flies. This is Detective Brad Tucker for the Unico Police Department. I'm speaking with a Baels Everett Marlowe, who is the only suspect in a string of unsolved murders committed between the years 1999 and 2018. Looking directly at me, he said, Mr. Marlowe has agreed to reveal the nature and details of his crimes to me at this time. Mr. Marlowe is aware that he is being recorded and agrees to continue with the interview. Is this correct, Mr. Marlowe? Tucker looked at me for confirmation. Yes, Detective Tucker. I know I'm being recorded, and I agreed to continue with my story. She was much more open by the time I'd finished with her. I couldn't help it. The play on words was funny, and had Tucker not been such a bore, he would have laughed too. But he didn't, and I stopped laughing. Knowing that there is nothing but hundreds of acres of government land between my barn and the nearest town, which is North Carolina, satisfied me that I'd not been discovered in what I was about to do. The sound of those screams traveled through the years and touched my soul as I sat there facing Tucker. I had a time shaking the memory off so I could continue. I showed her to a large empty stall with a concrete floor. She realized what was happening too late. Impaling her to the back wall with a pitchfork was easier than I thought it would be. She stood there struggling with the tines through her neck, looking at me with confusion in her eyes as she had no idea of what just happened. And then, the damnedest thing, she reached for me with blood all over her pale little hands and mouthed, "Help me, Baels." Tucker cleared his throat. Baels, who is he? Who is him? Who are you talking about? He is Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, cleanser of earth, bringer of man's salvation. They are, how should I put this? I thought how best to word my next phrase so that it would not be a lie, and it would be appropriate. They're being prepared for a special feast. The Grand Feast of Flies happens this year, and as with any special event, it takes much preparation. You should look under houses of missing girls, you know. Tucker stopped in his tracks, and I imagined the block of ice that had just settled in his gut as he looked back at that missing persons board. The photo at the top was his very own sweet daughter who'd gone missing last month, long before they had me in custody. I must say that Tucker quite surprised me by allowing me to sit in my cell for 3 days before he wanted to hear more from me. I truly thought he would hit me up right away, or as soon as his anger subsided enough that he didn't have to worry about getting into trouble with his superiors for beating me with a phone book or some such thing. It did, however, give me 3 days to think about and dwell on exactly how I would feed him the news he so longed for. But nothing would be straightforward. Tucker had to do his job, and moreover, he had to want to know the truth before he would ever be able to see it. If a person is in denial, he will not see the truth if it falls from the sky and shits on his head. The 3rd day after lunch had been served, the guard on duty told me to get ready for a visit from Tucker and Bannerman. My meals had consisted of mush for breakfast, ramen noodles for lunch, and ramen noodles for dinner for the last 3 days, even though the other inmates were being served real food. Tucker was punishing me, and that was good. That's what I expected from such a rightly man as Tucker. No starvation, just enough bad food to make one lose his desire to eat and starve himself, perhaps. If that happened, Tucker's hands were still clean. He was a careful man, a smart man, a worthy convert or adversary. Whichever he turned out to be would be fine with me. Beelzebub had sent Tucker's daughter to me. I'd been watching her for months before I actually set out to take her to be cleansed and sacrificed to the fly. I could feel his power flowing through my veins when my mind began to falter with the follow-through as I sat in my cell. The human part of me wanted to rail against the injustice of the world, the filth of the jail's living conditions, and worst of all, the human part of me spoke up, telling me things like, give a full confession quickly, and they'll be done with you. You'll get the death penalty or be released. And the teary-eyed human part wanted me to tell Tucker my big secret, tell him what I'd been keeping from him, but hinting at for the last days. Beelzebub put some steel back into my resolve, though, and I can always manage to bring that simpering, useless human part back under control before any damage can be done to the plan. It's all about the bigger picture at this point. To test even one seemingly righteous man. To try to convert just that one man. Everything has to be executed properly and promptly. I have to stick to the plan, or it all falls apart. Eating deliberately slow, I took the full half hour that all the other inmates got for their lunches in the cafeteria, which I never saw. I eat in my cell, and Tucker had the nerve to tell me it was for my own safety. He doesn't need to worry about that. Beelzebub has my back. I'm his perfect host, his perfect invoker, and his prime worshipper. He won't let anything happen to me, and that I'm sure of. But whatever made the detective feel better about the circumstances. A guard handcuffed me too tightly, grinned in my face about it, and told me to follow him. Another big guard followed close on my heels. They led me to another interview room closer to the office, in which I'd seen the picture of Tucker's daughter up on that missing persons board. My heart picked up a little speed, and a smile stretched my face as I walked by and saw the picture again. And how lovely she was. Such a beauty. In the interview room, I sat alone at a small square table. The guard who handcuffed me attached my handcuff chain to a lock on the table. I couldn't sit back in my chair without it pulling my arms uncomfortably, so I was forced to sit straight with my hands folded in front of the lock. Without speaking, Bannerman and Tucker entered. Tucker sat straight across from me and Bannerman to my left. They stared at me hard. There were no files, only a small pad of paper and a pen for Tucker. There were no two-way mirrors, and as far as I could see, there were no recording devices either. I didn't rule out that either or both of them were wearing wires, though I couldn't think why they would bother at this point. As before, I made myself still and wore that measured little smile that seemed to irk Bannerman and Tucker. I like to know I'm getting under their respective skins. Brad Tucker goes around seemingly so unruffled, but I knew that lately he'd been more than a bit ruffled. Lately, he'd been stretched to the snapping point, held there, and then stretched some more. His daughter, Angela, had started college. It was local, so she wasn't far from home, and her parents were proud, especially proud to go around telling all about her, was Brad Tucker. Proud father. Almost proud enough to be tainted, but not quite. Then after the first semester at school, Daddy started hearing rumors around town about his little girl, his little angel, as he called her. Drugs, alcohol, boys, depraved sexual encounters at parties, and all manner of debauchery online. Now, being a detective, Daddy didn't take too long researching and finding out way more about his little girl than he'd ever hoped to know. Sickened, heartbroken, angry, and driven by a sense of righteousness like no other, Tucker confronted his daughter about her behavior. They had a falling out of sorts, and Tucker worried, paced, and researched more, but delayed confronting her again to resolve the matter. That was at spring break. It was now going fall, and they never did make up. Angela disappeared a month ago, but Mommy and Daddy weren't in regular communications, so they didn't know she was gone for a whole week. Thinking about it, well, honestly, it made me smile and almost giggle. When I looked up at Tucker again, I saw him as a fly would see him, and knew that Beelzebub had granted me the use of his many eyes. It was scary and exhilarating simultaneously. I opened my mouth to tell Tucker that very thing, but all that escaped was a buzzing noise, the buzzing of a fly. Beelzebub had opened my eyes, but shut down my speech. Tucker and Bannerman weren't supposed to know how I could see them, and I understood at once and cleared my throat, sitting straight again. Straight and still, I waited. Bannerman spoke first. "Whatever the hell that was, I hope it's over now, Baels. Hey, asshat, where do you suggest we investigate for more evidence of your crimes anyway?" Tucker shot Bannerman a hard look but said nothing. Evidence of crimes? Only you believe there are crimes. I think of them as sacrifices to the greater good. Redemptive cleansing of tainted souls, that they may enter the pearly gates when the time comes. I let the smile drop from my face. Turning my head this way and that, I marveled at how wondrous the experience of many eyes seeing the same thing was. Tucker said flatly, "We're not interested in what you think you were doing. Where do we find more bodies, and the rest of the parts the ones we already have? It would give the families closure to be able to bury whole bodies of their loved ones." He didn't make eye contact. "Why don't you ask me what you really want to know, Detective Tucker? Are you still afraid of the truth? Will your soul become tainted after all?" Yum, yum, says Beelzebub. I made a slurping noise and I grinned. Tucker glared at me momentarily. To Bannerman, he said, "I say we go tear his house and buildings apart, board by board, and then have the backhoe set to digging." Bannerman said, "I don't know, boss. I don't think he kept the bodies there. Like he said, it would have been far too risky and he knew it. They were put somewhere else." Bannerman glanced at me, and I blew him a kiss. Bannerman, the little hothead, hit me hard in the mouth for my effort. He was so easy, so tainted. I licked my busted lip and made sure there was blood on my teeth when I grinned at him. "Under things," Bannerman said as if pondering the phrase's meaning. Under the houses of missing girls. Tucker gripped his pen tighter and let his eyes slide toward me. I'll show you where, if you're ready to know the truth, Detective Tucker. I wouldn't tell him, though. No, I wanted to see the expression when he found my secret. Tucker shook his head. Only if you point it out on the map. There's no way you're getting out of here to go traipsing around on some field trip, Baels. No, then I'll reveal nothing, and you'll have to go on wandering forever, won't you, Tucker? Bannerman subjected me to more abuse, and there was blood on my face, my forehead, running from my left nostril and coating my teeth when he was finally finished. Not looking at me, Tucker asked, Still feel the same way, Baels? He doodled on the pad of paper to keep from seeing the damage Bannerman did to my face. I spat blood into the silver table just to the right of the lock. No, sir. Tucker looked up and seemed suddenly interested. He flipped the paper over to a fresh sheet. All right. Give me the details. He poised his pen above the paper and raised his eyebrows at me, wrinkling his forehead all the way up to the bald top. It looked like frozen ripples on a pond, and I snickered. I feel like my head has been worked over by a truck sporting a pissed-off driver, but I still won't tell you anything. If you want to know, take me in the back of the cruiser. Mr. Meat Tenderizer over here can sit with me in the back, holding a gun on me, if it makes you feel better, Tucker. Bannerman slapped the back of my head hard enough for my hair to fly forward into my face, and I laughed heartily. Oh, yes, he was a nice one. Beelzebub would relish the savory, thick taste of his tainted soul for sure. Bannerman shot to his feet, and Tucker stood, throwing his arm out against his partner's chest. No, Bannerman, that's exactly what he wants. You've done enough. You don't want to have to go explaining how he acquired his new bloodied spots to the higher-ups, do you? He put his face directly in front of Bannerman's to block his view of mine, and I laughed and spat blood on the floor. The extraordinarily vast array of emotions fighting for dominance on Bannerman's face was excellent entertainment. Bannerman settled a little. Fine, but someone should really do the state and every family involved in this case a gigantic favor and kill this son of a bitch. Now, I wouldn't mind being taxed with pulling the trigger myself, Tuck. Bannerman jabbed an accusatory finger at me over Tucker's shoulder. Listen, Bannerman, it's fine. Relax. He's a fucking psycho. We all know he's guilty. We just need more information about the unknown, the victims. Tucker gave Bannerman a strange, twisted look. Bannerman looked like a candle after being left in a windowsill all day. He drooped on his frame, and then shame settled onto his features. Sitting in his seat with a thud, he said, Yeah, I guess we do, boss. I'm sorry. I lost my head for a minute there. He looked at me. Sorry, Mr. Marlowe. He cast his gaze to his hands dangling between his legs. Ah, he knew about Tucker's daughter, and Tucker's belief that I might be able to put the case to rest. I could see through Beelzebub's many eyes again, and the lights were at once beautiful and painful as they fragmented into 100 different optical illusions, glinting off the tiny beads of sweat on Tucker's bald head and pale face, and causing Bannerman's visage to shine as if under 1,000 tiny spotlights, all dancing, coalescing in my vision, and forming a more complete picture than I had before. Tucker sighed and rubbed his cheeks vigorously. Baels, are you going to do us a solid and lead us to more victims? Victims we don't know about yet. Oh, Detective Tucker. On my word, Mr. Tucker, on my word. The joy that wended through my being was undeniable. I was shuddering with delight at the idea of showing him what he asked for, actually. Bannerman, get the okay from the chief. It was a cold, hard command, not a request. No, please, at the end. Just the cold order to be followed without question. Was that a chink in his armor of righteousness? Could a crack be forming? No, I thought it very well could be. And before this day was over, Tucker would prove himself truly righteous, or a convert into the order of those to be sacrificed for cleansing to Beelzebub himself. An hour passed and Tucker had me remanded to my cell until the clearance came through. I sat in my cell for another hour before I was called out. The clearance took much longer than I thought it would, especially considering that it was the daughter of one of their own who was missing. The ride to Angela's house was uncomfortable. Bannerman's outrage after they found nothing under Angela's house was even more uncomfortable. He worked over my kidneys with his baton, and I spat up blood into the floorboard of the cruiser. It was all part of the plan, though. I took it and managed an infuriatingly bloodied smile as we headed for Megan's house. It was going on midnight when we parked in her driveway. Everyone, except me, Bannerman, and Tucker, was fatigued. The job of investigating the scene began tediously with officers looking in the attic, basement, and a space below the stairs. Although Beelzebub had warned me not to interfere, I could stand it no longer. I wanted to guide the two in the general direction anyway. Tucker looked disdainfully at me. Well, any suggestions, Mr. Fly God? Ah, Detective Tucker. Tisk, tisk. Now you know I'm not supposed to give you all the information. You're supposed to do your work. Who are you hoping to find anyway? Would it be your beautiful, sexy young daughter, Angela? I drew her name out as if I were in love with her, and in a way, I guess I was. She was the key to all of this, and that required that I love her, at least a little. Tucker turned pallid. Dark, bruised bags stood under his eyes, and his face showed just how haggard he'd become. Then, there was a tremendous transformation as he became enraged and charged at me. I barely braced as he tackled me, taking me to the ground, knocking the air from my strained lungs. As he drew back a fist, Bannerman yanked him off me. No, not now. Not this close to a revelation. Think of Angela, Tuck. Tucker jerked away from Bannerman and stomped to the side of Megan's house. Megan Lore. That was a heartwarming memory to relive as I watched Bannerman ordering the backhoe operator to put a hold on digging. 4 men with shovels were sent to the basement. Yes, that was it. They would find my secret stash just under the edge of the concrete floor. That floor ended halfway through the basement. And soon, there were shouts and much commotion from the basement. They had finally found Angela, all cocooned up in plastic, safe, and decaying at a perfect rate. a rate that would make her flesh as delectable as her tarnished soul to Beelzebub. I was forced to sit outside near a bush in the yard, missing the most exciting part of the night. I'd been prepared for this night for well over a month, and now I was forced to miss the best part. I had been summoning Beelzebub the whole time I sat there. He would soon come to collect any tainted soul I'd been in contact with, which meant Bannerman and or the righteous Tucker. How long after finding his decaying, rotting, stinking fly feast of a daughter would Tucker remain righteous, I wondered. During the commotion, I watched for signs of the god of flies. Men began to stare toward the mountain behind the house, pointing and exchanging fearful expressions before drawing guns, and then just scattering towards cruisers, leaving the scene as they yelled through their CBs for backup. They backed their cruisers up until they formed a barrier between the house and the road that led to other houses farther down the mountain. The ruckus from the basement continued until Bannerman and Tucker made their way back outside to where I was sitting. Bannerman kicked me backward, breaking a tooth with his well-landed kick. Tucker drew his sidearm and stood poised over me. I heard the metallic click and smiled widely at him. Yes, Tucker, give yourself over to Beelzebub. Your soul should be the sweetest of them all. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back. Tucker screamed and shot once, but the shot was over my head and thudded into the earth. And something else made a noise in the woods behind the house, and I looked in that direction, expecting my god to emerge. Tucker turned reluctantly to explore the noise. And that's when Beelzebub's distinctive buzz rattled the airwaves around me, and I knew I would be okay. Tucker acted as if he didn't see Beelzebub as he came into view around the corner of the house and headed inside. He wanted his feast, and the god of flies wouldn't be denied because of some irrelevant human squabble out in the yard. Bannerman yelled, "Tucker, the basement! It went into the basement!" Bannerman ran for the house, his gun at the ready. "You better go, Tucker. Beelzebub needs a meal, and your daughter was the main course for the night. Maybe you'll be the dessert." Tucker pulled the trigger, and a white-hot pain shot through my right shoulder, and I screamed. Finally, Tucker had dealt a blow that I couldn't remain silent through. That was more than a chink in his armor. His armor would drop off completely by the time he reached that basement again. I rolled to my side and watched as he ran inside after Bannerman. Several gunshots ripped through the muggy midnight air, and Tucker emerged, dragging Bannerman into the lawn. There wasn't much left of Bannerman. His torso was mostly intact, but he had no limbs, and part of his face had been crushed and peeled away. Beelzebub had taken his meal. Tucker fell to the ground, trying to cradle what was left of his partner in his lap as he screamed at the sky. His armor remained intact as Beelzebub crept out of the house and toward me. Smiling, I raised my handcuffed hands for him to free. All the cops who'd moved their cruisers to form a barrier now ran toward Tucker and Bannerman, completely ignoring me and the god of flies. And in his buzzing voice, Beelzebub whispered into my mind, "The feast has been eaten and appreciated. You shall be rewarded soon, my son." But what about Tucker? Did his armor fail? Did he become tainted? I shivered as Beelzebub came closer than ever and snapped my bindings with one snip of his jaws. No, but his righteousness has a deep need for vengeance festering underneath. Soon, living in his regret, his armor will fall away, and you shall be there to watch me devour him." Beelzebub took to his wings and disappeared toward the mountain with the sound of a helicopter. I ran, but I was apprehended again very soon. It's all right. It's all part of the great plan of Beelzebub to cleanse the earth. I have to be in this jail cell so that I have a front row seat to Detective Brad Tucker's fall from righteousness. And I sit here, forcing myself to be still and wear that small, measured smile that used to infuriate Bannerman so badly.